All right, we should be on the air. That's good. That's pretty good resolution. I'm gonna check the YouTube. Okay. All right, hello everybody. I'm Igor Sorokin from the CS Club. I'm a volunteer tutor there. Super senior, super science senior. Computer science. Been here a while. Started off with Java. And the reason I got into Python was because I used to do Google Code Jam, Topcoder, and Facebook Hacker Cup problems. And some of them required me to use different types, like big integer in Java. And it was just a headache to use in Java because you have to make an object, you have to throw the int in there, and you have to use a bunch of libraries, and it was just a mess. And then someone told me hey, you can just do it in Python in 10 lines. I'm just like, what? You're telling me I could take 150 lines of Java and put in 10 lines of Python? And he's just like, yeah. And I'm just like, okay, I'll try it. And then within 30 minutes, I did it. Something I spent, close to hours, well, lots of hours doing in Java. I was just like, wow, Python's really amazing. I won't tell you too much about all the things Python's amazing for. I'll just get to the straight stuff, syntax, stuff you could actually use. And you could do this all on your own. So if you haven't already installed some sort of Python command line, you could just do stuff there. However, I recommend you guys getting an actual IDE so that you're able to debug and have multiple projects, maybe connect the database, maybe make some apps using Python. Python's really great for the web using certain frameworks like Django. This session will mostly be just about syntax, just the basics of Python. Hopefully after this, what you'll get out of it is that you'll be able to immediately start coding and being able to do everything you could do in the languages you knew beforehand. You'll be able to do that in Python. So you'll see a lot of similarities hey, this is what a for loop looks like. This is what classes look like, objects, certain library functions in those languages, et cetera, et cetera. If anyone has a question at any point, make sure to just interrupt me. All right, let's get started. So cool thing about Python, which is different from a lot of other languages, is that it has a certain type of typing, which is called duck typing. It's kind of slang, but essentially that means it doesn't have types. So in Java, you have. Actually, let me do a quick poll. How many here are familiar with Java? All right. How many are familiar with C? Wow. Okay. Good. Just to make sure we're coming from a vaguely similar background. So in languages like Java and C, I mean, of course, in C you don't have string, but in Java you have to specify the type of something. So that's usually how you do it in Java, and then you have to specify the type before, and then the variable name, and then equals, et cetera, et cetera. So Python uses duck typing. So essentially, it's kind of funny. So essentially, it knows what type something is without you having to specify it. So you can make a string just like this. So a good question would be, and then you can just continue. Is that because my name's Igor? Anyways, so a good question would be, I misspelled integer. A good question, no one fixed me. Anyways, what's actually interesting is earlier I was messing around with PyCharm. This is PyCharm, by the way. This is my recommended IDE for you guys to use for Python. You guys could also use the plugin for Eclipse, but PyCharm is pretty great, as well as IntelliJ for Java. Just a side note. So you can see in PyCharm right now, there's like a yellow yellow dash under integer, that's not an error. It's just telling you that you misspelled it, which is pretty cool. Anyways, so a good question to ask right now is, how does Python know what type something is if you don't specify in the beginning, like you would in C and Java? So its methodology behind that is duck typing. If it quacks like a duck, if it sounds like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So what it'll do is, well, this is all like compiler level and low level stuff. It'll look at this variable and it'll be like, okay, well, it has characters in it. Clearly, it can't be an integer. Clearly, it can't be, you know, a double or a float. And it'll look at this. It says, oh, well, this doesn't have characters in it. Clearly, it's not a string. So you don't really need to specify any types. So you can just initialize stuff exactly like this. Moving on, we can print stuff. Depending if you're using Python 2.7 or 3, the printing might be slightly different. It won't be that big of a deal. So if you're using Python 3 to print stuff, you just type in print and then the variable name. And if we run that, actually, hold on, let me comment some stuff out. Don't look, spoilers. Oh, feel free to follow along with me. It's a good like experiment, you know. So it printed something. Oh, the way actually I should do something beforehand. So as soon as you get PyCharm, so I'm going back a little bit. Actually, raise your hand if you installed a Python IDE or a Python like command line tool. What? Oh, how to make like a project or anything? Oh, okay. Yeah. You guys should have mentioned that. All right, no problem. I'll just go over that real quick. So you go to File. You got a new project. You could name it something like test demo. You have to specify. So if you're on Windows, so anyone here using a Mac, Python's already installed by default. However, if you're using Windows, you have to download Python, the exe, and then PyCharm separately. And then you install PyCharm, and then after you install PyCharm, it'll work. And then you go, when you do this, this will be empty. And what you have to do is you hit the little gear here, and then you have to find it where it actually is. So in my case, it's in my program files under Python and Python exe. So just choose that exe as your interpreter, and then you click OK. And then that should make your project. So if you guys have used Eclipse or NetBeans, this should look pretty familiar. You have your projects on your left. And currently, so this is a project. Currently, it doesn't have anything in it. So to actually make a Python script file, so which are similar to like Java files or C files, you right-click on the project. You go to New. Make sure not to click File. So this file, that just creates like a generic file without any extension, so that won't actually run or anything. A lot of people do that because they're like, okay, I need to make a file, and you go to File. You actually want to click on Python file. And then you want to name it something like something. And you click OK. And then there's the something file. And it should do the author thing, which doesn't really matter. And then you could just start doing stuff. And then to run this, I'm sure there's some command to run this, but you do run, and then it prints the stuff on the bottom. Sorry. How do I go back to the? Any other questions? Oh, another interesting thing about PyCharm. Actually, who's using PyCharm? All right, that's enough people to talk about a little more. By default, line numbers don't appear. I like line numbers. They're really useful to find out like where you have a bug in your code. And like I've met people who have been like programming for 2 years and they don't have line numbers enabled. Just right-click on this little tab thing, like where you usually put a breakpoint. just right click on that and then show line numbers, just something small. You guys could have figured that on your own. You could go to tools. So next thing, I could explain about PyCharm before I get into actual like syntax and stuff, is go to File, Settings. So you see how I have the black layout and stuff? I mean, it's just preference and stuff. But if you guys want that also, it's a little easier to see certain variables. You would go to your File, Settings, you go to Appearance, and then you're able to change that. So change the theme. So by default, I think it's IntelliJ, but I change it to Dracula. More puns about Igor. And then you can go into editor, and then you could do certain stuff with the font. You could increase the font. So in this case, I increased the font to 18. That's why my characters look so huge for you guys. But you can change the font to whatever you want. You can also change the colors. You could set the colors on your own, et cetera, just small stuff like that. Don't be afraid to go into settings and change stuff. Oh, let me find since I created this project, I think I lost the other project. Let me try to find the other project. There it is. That was weird. All right. So
what if you wanted to add a string and an integer together?
Add a string and an integer. Okay.
Something was 5.
Yep. So what you have to do, so that's casting. That's actually the second part. Is so like logically, what would your guys' guess be? Would something like, oh, the misspell thing, right? Would something like that work? What's your guys' guess? So logically, that looks correct. However, in Python, before you print something, it looks at this. So say that this wasn't some string. Say that it was some other integer. Wow, that's a lot of people. Hey, Kevin, count them up. Anyways, say that this was some other integer. Python might get confused, and it might think, hey, should I add these integers up, or should I just print them and concat them together? So what you have to do in Python, because it's not confused, if you just try printing some integer, it prints the 5 because it's not confused with the plus sign. However, if you do this, actually, let's run it. I mean, the best way of learning is actually experimentation. It crashes. So what does it say? It says can't convert int object to string implicitly. So why? So the thing is that print is a method, and the way it's written in Python is it needs to take in exactly one data type. So if you only have if you're only taking in an integer, it like, okay, I'll just convert that to a string and then print it. If you take it in a string, perfect, just print it. However, if you're taking a string, you're taking an integer and you're trying to add those two together, it doesn't really know what to do, you know? Should I convert the letters to numbers and then add those, or should I just turn this into a string and add it together? In fact, you can do something, and you could do that. What do you think something is? What do you think will happen there? Like, does that even like really make sense? It's kind of ambiguous, right? Like if I gave that to you on a piece of paper just as a human, and I told you as a human interpreter, what should that print? Like you're gonna have to ask me questions and be like, can you be more specific, right? So if we run that right now, it crashes again. So to fix that, what you can do is you have to cast. So that's something most people should be familiar with from their Java and C backgrounds. So you can cast either way, or whichever thing you want. So what are we ambiguous about? What we're ambiguous about is whether we want to convert this to a string and then have something 5, or whether we want to convert this to an integer and add them up. So for example, this could be the number 6, or brain fart, number 6, right? So depending on what we want to do, we'll cast accordingly, right? So if you have some string and you want to add these numbers up, you'll cast it to an int. So in order to cast, you just do integer. I mean, it's one of the things in the Python library. So you have int, you have string, you have list, which I'll explain later. You have double. Actually, I'll mention that later. So you have double and you have float. There's also no chars. Everything's just taken as a string. Just a small side note. All right, let's ignore double for now. What?
Is it recorded?
I think so.
It's not just broadcast. Is it recording?
It records on YouTube automatically, like on YouTube. All right, sorry about that. So, so if you want to convert a string to an integer, you would put some string inside this integer, and so this converts it to an integer, and then you could like add 5 to it, and then if we print all of that, that's not ambiguous at all, right? You know exactly what you're gonna get. Oh, I should go over comments real quick. So to comment stuff, I mean, this is pretty simple stuff. It's just a pound sign. That's a single line comment. To comment multiple lines, it's 3 single quotes, like that. So if I run that right now, it gives me 11, which is a sum of 6 and 5. So that's not ambiguous. Now if we cast some integer to a string. Also, what's great about IntelliJ and PyCharm as compared to Eclipse and NetBeans, it's a pretty small thing, but as soon as you start typing something, it just auto-completes stuff. So you sort of have the advantage of making very long or medium-long variable names, which are very specific and very accurate as to what you're actually doing without actually having to type all that stuff out. Because like, if you guys have been in the workplace or have any experience in like corporate life, like they kind of require you guys to use very specific variables so you know other people don't get confused. And in school, you're just mostly coding for yourself and just to get the assignment done. And all the professor looks at is that it works. And then you can have variable names which are just like 1 character. And then like you look at the code a month later and you're like, what is it? What does this do? What is K? What is the meaning of K? Anyways. Just a small rant there. So if you cast some integer to a string and you will add that to some string, that's not ambiguous at all, right? Some string is the number 6, and then some integer is 5, but then you're casting it to a string, and then you're printing it. So the result will be, shout it out. Good job. So that's casting. String, float, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so some other stuff you can do with a string. So some string so you guys could just like say that this was like in C or Java. What's usually some stuff you guys do with strings? Or characters for that matter. Concat? Compare? Sure. So we'll actually go into comparisons a bit later. But yeah, we could compare stuff. So you have some string A, some string B, and then we can have Jack. So if statements, right? If statements are pretty similar to most other languages. Syntax might be slightly different. So all you need to do is usually in both C and Java, stuff would look like this, right? And then you put in brackets, right? Python doesn't have any brackets. I'll explain that shortly. It also doesn't need those. So Python's kind of a clever language, because if you look at this line right here, most languages you look at vaguely have this syntax. I mean, this line right here, this probably works in C, C++, Java, and like countless other languages I don't know of. But does it need everything which is in it? Like, does it need the quotes? Like, what do the quotes really do? They just add like a divider between the if and the sum string, right? But doesn't the space kind of do that? So if I remove the brackets, just imagine you're the human interpreter again. That could be like some superhero. So if you remove the brackets, like, is it still pretty clear as a human interpreter? Like, there's not that much ambiguity, right? It's still pretty clear. So in Python, you don't really need the quotes. And then what's the equals equals? That's just like, you know, you just sort of taught that in like your first programming course that, hey, equals equals does comparisons and stuff, right? But what if you weren't taught that and you looked at it, right? Maybe if you have a math background, you could look at that and you're like, okay, I sort of know what that does, right? But why not just like put some English in there, right? Just have some keyword which is almost equivalent to the equals equals. So how about like is, right? Isn't that kind of like English to you guys?
Yes.
If something is equal to some other thing, then like do this, right? And then in most languages, you do the brackets, which are important because that signifies where something starts, where something ends. So if you have an else statement here, the brackets tell you where the if ends and where the else starts, right? However, and so if you remove them, you don't know if maybe the else is nested in the if, you know, you're not really sure about that. So one small thing, at the end of a condition, you have to put a colon. So that's kind of Python's way of saying open square bracket. So that's the open squiggle, not square bracket. Squiggly, curly. Curly is the correct. Curly, yeah. I say squiggly. Most people get what I mean. I'll say curly from now on. So curly. So instead of having a bunch of brackets, I mean, just a question, you know, just like a preference question. Don't you guys hate when you're like, you wrote code, everything logically works, everything almost every time you write something, everything logically works, in your head at least. But don't you guys hate like stuff doesn't work because of a curly brace, because of a, you know, because of a circular brace or a square brace, right? Doesn't that stuff just get in the way? Wouldn't it be great, like you're laying in bed, you're like, you know, thinking about making the world a better place, and you're like, hey, I should get rid of those brackets, right? Wouldn't that be like really great? So of course, it's not as easy as that because there's some use to them, right? I mean, you could tell the difference between if and else, right? So Python actually handles that by and improves readability in that case by adding tabs. So after I put this colon, I hit enter, and then you could see it put my cursor on the next line. Actually, I didn't enable line numbers. Someone, if I was sitting in the crowd, I would have yelled at me for not doing that, because like I would be referring to line number 4, and you guys wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Anyways, so on line number 5, it auto tabbed for me, right? So if I have some statement here, like let me just do some dummy code: x equals 1, y equals 2, right? Some variables, right? Naturally inside a condition, and then say I have another if statement: if x is y, and then you do some other stuff, right? So what is this right here? How do I what? How do you end? So I'll explain that right now. So one tab essentially means that this is the entire body of the if statement. So it ends as soon as when the next time it sees something without a tab. It sounds kind of confusing, but I'll explain it in a second. So if I do this here, so what is in the body of the if statement? What lines? 5 to 8, that's right. So 5 and 6 are definitely in there for sure. But what about 7? That's in there as well because it has one tab. And then what's the body of this if statement? 8, because it has 2 tabs. So the way internally the Python compiler is reading this is it says, okay, he opened an if statement. Okay, well, everything in the if statement has at least one tab. So this has one tab, this one has one tab, this has 2 tabs, but that's obviously more than one. So count that as being inside the if statement as well. And then when it sees that, hey, this has no tabs, well, logically, this if statement has ended. So like reading that again as the human interpreter, it's pretty clear, right? So if it's clear to you as a human, then you could probably code a language which could interpret it as, you know, clear as well. So the brackets aren't really really necessary. But just to just if anyone is confused, it's not letting me do that. It's like auto formatting, like, hey, I don't want brackets in here. But in other languages, especially Java and C, essentially what I'm doing is this. Whoa, that really doesn't like that, right? So the brackets don't really add all that much. I mean, because you're tabbing either way. However, like in Java and C, you can like do this and it's still valid, right? But the tab just makes the readability, you know, so much better. Like, what would you rather see, this, which has like 4 unnecessary, you know, squiggly brackets, or that, right? So it does take a little bit of adjusting. That is probably like the first thing you see in Python when you look at Python code is you see all the tabs and you're kind of thrown off. It does take a little bit of adjusting, but eventually you get the hang of it. It's not, you know, it's not too difficult. Small thing is if you do this, this is actually covered in this if statement. So if this if statement is false, or if say it's true. So if this if statement is true, and it is true, it's not gonna run this twice. It's gonna run like this is part of this body, not part of this body. So when this if statement runs, it's only running everything with 2 tabs. So this has 2 tabs, and then it sees 1 tab, and it stops reading. And then this is run under this if statement, just to like, you know, go over that stuff. And then you could have like more nesting if you want, et cetera, et cetera. I hope that was clear to everyone. That's kind of like the very first thing which throws everyone off. Yeah?
You're pressing an enter key and you're moving your tab. So is it a combination of an enter or a tab sequence, or how does it read? Like if I place the y is equal to 1 in the same line using 1 tab, would it be the same thing?
Using 1 tab.
Yeah. Instead of doing.
So you're saying you put everything on 1 line?
Yeah, like does that work like tab is separate, or the slash t is separate?
Slash t for separate. It actually requires a new line. Yeah. So you can't like. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you can't just like do tab here and then do like z equals 1. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, you can't do that. You can't. It reads and it requires a new line too, which also helps readability. Like, I mean, then the tab's kind of redundant, anyways, right? Like, just think of like a the human interpreter again. If you just look at this, you're like, just look at that. I'm not really clear what that says anymore. X is Y colon Z equals 1. Looks like some sort of other language. Yeah, so it requires a new line and the tab and stuff. So all of that stuff is called scope. Just to sort of, I forgot what the word was, and I remembered. Yeah, so all that stuff is scope. Good question. So, oh yeah, for strings. So say that you have some string A. So usually what would you do to the string, Jack, right? So a common thing you do to a string is like take a specific character. Yeah? Oh, else? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't go over that. I was going to go over variables first and then go into if, else, for, and stuff like that, but it's all right. So Control Z is your friend. Does everyone actually know what Control Y is? It actually goes forward. Oh, yeah, it does go forward. Yeah. It's pretty cool. A lot of people don't know what that does, and it's really helpful. Like the first time I discovered it, I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. All right. I think I went too far back. I spaced out for a second there. All right, so we have this if statement. This if statement is true. It does something. So like we print some string plus is equal to some string b, right? And we don't really need the else. This is just a quick review, right? Jack is equal to Jack. Makes sense, right? But say that it's Jack and Jill. You have the else. So this is how you do the else. pretty straightforward. So you can do the same thing, copy paste, and then you could just change the condition to not equal to, right? And then you could print. And you could say Jack is not equal to Joe, right? Now say that you want to do if else. That's also something really common in most languages. So what you would do is you would do, so if else looks a little different than most languages that you have. Usually most languages, C and Java, you have else and then you have if, and you have the condition and stuff. Python, you just write it as elif. It's kind of a weird word, but, and then you write your condition. So you do some, well, I guess we need another string, right? So we'll do some string C equals Jimmy. I don't know what's up with the words which start with J. They intrigue me. So you do is some string C, and then you can change this to C. So what this will do is it'll compare some string A to B, and if that's equal to, say it's equal to, if it compares A to C, and if that's equal to that, then it'll be equal to. So yeah, good job, guys. Good job. So that's actually important because you need, so Python needs to know when you ended your statement, because later you can have like some other stuff here. So at the end of every condition statement, you need a colon. Good job. And it didn't print anything because Jack is not equal to Jimmy. But if we have two Jacks here, it will go into the if else. And then you can continue making if else's on and on, like every language. And you actually don't, I mean, you could leave this new line here. I made that new line by accident, but you could actually leave it in there. Like it doesn't, it only, like I said, it only parses the tabs. All right, so that's if else. And then of course at the end you can have not equal to anything. All right. But of course, it's not going to print that because you have to change this. Simple stuff. Yep. All right. Any questions? Yep.
What about other operators for comparison besides equal, like greater than or equal or less than?
Yep. So mathematical.
When they ask a question, repeat it so the people.
Oh. So the question that was asked was, what about the other comparisons? So like less than, greater than, less, greater than, or equal to. So those would be math operations, right?
Yes.
All right. So before we do that, let me just mention something which I missed. So say that instead of making all these if else, say that you want to make sure that you want to print flying monkey only when this is not equal to this. So essentially, remember how earlier I stated that is equal to, well, is sort of the equivalent to this. What about the not version of that? So in like most languages, it would be this, right? In Python, does anyone take a guess who actually doesn't know Python?
Exclamation.
Yeah. Well, why do you need? What is the exclamation? What does it mean?
Not A.
Is this good? Is this good English?
Yes.
No.
Oh wait, crap. Never mind. Yeah, I can't do English and computer science at the same time. Yeah, I know. I'll go over that later. So for everyone who earlier I stated, hey Sasan, you could find a seat in the back. So earlier I stated that is essentially the equivalent of equal to. That's not quite correct, but for our purposes right now, when you're comparing a string to a string, it is correct. I'll explain that later. So just put like a little asterisk in your notes. If you guys take notes. I don't take notes, but it's useful to take notes sometimes.
How do you write a comment?
How do you write a comment? Yeah, I explained that. So what you do is you do a hashtag. Yeah, hashtag. A hashtag. I feel dirty saying that word. Anyways, a hashtag for one line, and then 3 single quotes, for a multi-line comment. So if I print if I run right now, it's not going to print anything. All right, so that's just how to do not. So is not, if something is not the other thing, plain English, pretty clear. If you were writing the interpreter yourself or the compiler, or interpreter actually. If you were writing the interpreter yourself, you'd be able to really know what it's doing. You really wouldn't need to have this. All right, so the earlier question, comparisons with integers. Cool, good question. So they're actually really similar to, I'm not typing the rest of the word out. They're actually really similar to many other languages. So you have some int, you have another int too, right? So you do if some int is another int, then you're going to print something. Of course, that's not what you wanted. You wanted greater than or equal to, right? So you say less than. That doesn't work. Is less than. Try that. There you go. So yeah, it's actually no English here. Not sure why. But you can just sort of, from the previous languages you learned, you could just sort of apply the same operators. Like I explained, you could actually use the equals to if you wanted to. It does the exact same thing. It's just that.
Do they have a quicker than English?
Oh yeah, no, for some reason. At least not that I know of. That's a lot of keywords. Yeah, it'd be a lot of parsing. But yeah, you can just use you could just use the previous symbols in your previous languages. Like this would be greater than, equal to, less than or equal to, et cetera, et cetera. Good question. All right, so for strings, we gotta move along here. A lot of material, not enough time. All right, so you have some string, you have Jack, something. So I'm just going to burst through here because this is, most of these concepts are familiar. It's just that the syntax and the formatting, the package is a little different. Anyways, so you have some string, and something you usually want to do with strings is getting a specific character out of there, right? So if we want the J, what would you do? In Java, it would be charat, right? In C, it'd be an array. You'd have a char array, and then you just use the element. And that's actually sort of what Python chooses to do, is you do 0, and you actually get the J out of there. So it does that because Python represents strings as a list. So 0 would be the first character, 1 would be the second character, et cetera, et cetera. What else can you do with strings? You can capitalize strings. Yep. Yeah, sure. I'll actually get to that shortly. Let me just burst through all the library stuff real quick. So if you want to capitalize Jack, you just do capitalize, run it. Or capitalize, only capitalizes the first letter. If you want to capitalize everything, you do upper. These are just like library things. If you want to lowercase it, you do lower. And let's see here, lower, upper. If you want to find where something is, so like say that you have a long string. I almost got some real words in there. Anyways, say that you have a long string and you want to find where the first occurrence of, say, Y is. You can use find. You'd put the character Y in there, and it'll tell you the index. There's a Java method for that. I don't remember off the top of my head right now. But you could also count the amount of letters. So like if you want to count all the A's, so there's a few A's in there. Instead of counting them by yourself, you can just put count and then the character. That will give you the character. So it gives you, there's 3 A's in this string. There's one right there, and one at the end. So that's find, count. Actually, let me hurry up and ask your question. Replacing something, right? Yeah. Oh, removing. Yeah. So there is no remove, but there's a replace, which essentially does sort of the same thing. So like this string has, actually, let's do a more familiar string. So let's go sassafras. It's a great word. Anyways, I don't know why I made it all caps. So if you want to remove something, actually a great way of learning methods and APIs in general and libraries, which I sort of did for Java and Python, is just sort of do dot and then just like read these. And like most of these are pretty self-explanatory. This one right here is digit. I mean, that's pretty similar with Java. Is numeric, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, so replace. So there's actually no remove. Like if you go through this, you won't find any remove. You can just reuse replace. Well, how would you use replace? Does anyone have any ideas how you would use replace to get rid of all the S's in sassafras? Space. Well, if you remove all the S's and put a space there, then you have a bunch of spaces. So you didn't really remove it, you just replaced it. Blank, right. So the first parameter in replace is what you want to remove. So you want to remove the S. And then the second parameter is what you want to replace it with. So you're replacing it with nothing, empty string. So if
Can you replace multiple things, or would you have to do it on a new line? Like, could you replace S and?
You would have to do it on a new line. Once you start removing multiple things, I'd recommend just reading up on regex in Python. So let's run this real quick. I had an error because I didn't have enough brackets. You still have to make sure the brackets are aligned. Can't really get rid of that. Oh, so small thing. If you're using Python 3, the print statement requires double circular quotes. However, if you're using Python 2.7, which possibly some of you are, it'd just be like this, Python, just a space is enough. But they put in the circular quotes. It's just a small thing. Some people might be like scratching their head like, hey, why isn't this printing? I'm copying exactly what he said. So there you go. You got rid of all the S's, and now it just says afra. All right. Yeah, okay. So that's how to replace stuff.
I have a question.
Yep.
What's the yellow underline stand for?
Good question. Missing white space after the. So in general, in like Java and Python, like the yellow are like suggestions. They don't actually stop the code. Red usually stops the code. So yeah, if you just hover over this, it says there's a missing white space. That's just for readability. Now it just doesn't complain anymore, but it works in the exact same way. In fact, if you have a typo, so, well, I guess it didn't complain about sassafras, but like earlier, I typed in integer wrong. But if I type in like dinosaur, and I make that equal to like 0, and if I misspell dinosaur, it's gonna be like, you misspelled dinosaur. And I'll be like, I'm computer science. I don't even know how to spell stuff. Anyways, yeah, the yellow is just suggestions. Go ahead.
If you try to remove a character that's not in there, like remove K, for example.
Oh, cool. Yeah, see what happens. I believe off the top of my head, it'll give you a -1, but don't quote me on that. Oh yeah, I mean, like, you know, it's kind of it's like going through your room searching for something which isn't there, right? Or Schrodinger's cat or whatever, right? Something like that. Anyways, so one more thing, and then I think we'll be done with strings. So stripping, that's usually important for corporate life in general. So say that you have sassafras and there's just a bunch of spaces in front of it, or even one space, doesn't really matter. You want to get rid of those spaces. If you're doing like a password check, or I don't know what you're doing. So if you print that right now, there's a bunch of spaces. To get rid of that, you do, since the spaces are on the left, you do L strip. Strip is similar to what the Java has, L strip. So it gets rid of the spaces. And if you have the spaces on the right, change the L to a R. Whoops, I did a debug. Anyways, it gets rid of the spaces as well. How do I close that? All right, so I think that should be it for Yep.
Strings have the same properties as in Java, like the immutable nature of that's how we define strings in Java. So how are they defined in Python?
They're defined as lists. So that's why you can index them. So you can do element A, and then you can go and get stuff. And then that's just easier for Java. Well, that doesn't work because that's not a number. Yeah, if you do 3, you get 3. I showed that earlier. Yeah, they're stored as lists, which would help you out. Yeah.
The question was like, is it replace the original string or it makes a copy of it?
Oh, yeah, the return type?
Yeah.
It returns a, oh, sorry, I should repeat the question. So the question was, when you apply a API method to, well, the way I'm interpreting the question, when you apply an API method to a string, does it return a copy of the string, or does it return, or does it like mutate the string, right? So we could actually find out, sort of test it yourself. So you have another string, and then you're going to do some string, and then you're going to do dot, and then you're going to do, yeah, why not do lstrip, you know?
What else?
It gets lstrip. It gets rid of all the spaces in front of a string. So if we do that, and then we print another string, and then we print that, it's going to work. And then if we print some string, it still has the spaces. So yeah, it does return a copy of that string. Yep. And actually, that's the reason. Sorry, Gary, hold on. So that's the reason why this works, is because remember how I said earlier, print requires some sort of type, right? So it requires this to return. It requires the lstrip internally to return a string, and after it returns a string, print knows what to do with the string, and then it works. If this didn't return anything, print would not have anything to print, right? Yeah, go ahead, Garrick.
In Java, they need to download some string to get
String to what?
in char. Do they?
To char?
Yeah.
So there's no chars in Python. There's not really any need for a char. Like, I mean, you guys could correct me if I'm wrong, but
Let's say
repeat the question. Oh, can you guys quiet down in the back? Quiet down. All right, good. Thank you. So yeah, there's no need for chars. I don't
think you go to 1, 2, what letter number 1, letter number 2.
using the letter number 2. Yeah. So if you want to get a char out of there and save it, you can be like you can do char a, and then you could do some string, and then you can do the index. Where's the a? Or actually, let's do something clever. Say that you don't know where the a is. You can do find me the a. That will return what? That actually returns me the index of where the very first a is. And actually with find, say that you don't want the first a, you want like the a from the middle onward, you can actually set the indexes. So you can be like from index number 4 to the end, so like to 10 or something. Anyways, so you find the first a, which is at position number 1, and then you'll put that in so 1. So if you do the element of 1 of some string, that will give you the a, and then you can save that into char. And then if we print char a, that will print the char right there. So yeah, so but this right here, this is not a character, it's a char. Actually, a great way, something I should have mentioned earlier, a great way of knowing what type you're working with. So remember how earlier I mentioned that you just have like a bunch, you have duck typing, you just have a bunch of like integers and stuff, or a bunch of variables, and you don't know what type they are. So that, say that you're receiving something through a method, and you don't know what it is, right? Because it's Python, and you're like, what is this? Actually, we should just do like something thing, something 2, something 1, right? You don't know what something is, right? What you can do is you can do type, and then you could do something. And if you print that, it will return you the type. It won't. So let me get rid of something wrong here. I'll fix that. So it returns you, tells you that something1 is a string str. And earlier, remember with the if statements, you can do if something is, oh, sorry. If the type of something is a class, right? Because we just printed the type of something1 and it returned us the string. Sorry. You should. Anyways, then we'll print this is a string. And if we run that, this is a string, right? And if you put int here, it won't run. And then the same thing, if you do the type of something too, it will print the type right there. All right? Cool. So I was doing characters real quick. So it's complaining right now. Why is it complaining? Unresolved reference. Oh, it's because I threw it away. Right. Some string does not exist. Sass. Just sass. Oh, no. Sass is boring. Sassy. Sassy. All right. We run that. It gives us the A. So yeah, character A is a string, and we could find that out by doing this. So yeah, characters aren't really useful. Like having its own type. You know, why don't we just cast it as a string of one, index? Yeah, I mean, you really don't really need it. You know. All right, so we went over casting. All right, so let's go over some review. So here you have a string of 5.7. So this is a string 5.7. If you print it, actually I should run. Actually, what I should do. Ignore in your head everything which is commented. That's great. What happened there? I think I have misaligning comments. All right. Sorry. All right, 5.7, that's a string. You could find out it's a string by doing type, like I showed. So say that you want to convert that to a float and then add something to it. So this is kind of like review, but we haven't used floats yet. So what you'll do is you'll convert it to a float using float. You'll save it in a variable, and then you'll print it. But before you print it, you add like 0.3 to it. So this type is now a float. Internally, it's a float. And then that should print. That should print a 6. There's a 6. And there's no collision here because this is a float and then this is a float. So before it goes to the print statement, it adds the float to the float. It returns a float, and then it gives it to the print statement, and then the print statement's not complaining because it's given two things. And then you could even expand on this. In fact, you can do it. You can even do this, you know. I mean, kind of like review. So let's convert the float, which is a 6, back to an integer, or not back to an integer, but to an integer. See what we get. Another collision. Comments. Cursed comments. Can't do anything about comments. So we converted to an integer. So we converted, what did we convert? We didn't convert this float. Oh no, we did convert this float. So interesting thing there is, I mean, referring to the question you asked earlier, does it actually affect the thing? So this is 5.7, right? And then we add 0.3 to it. Since we're not saving that back into this value is not changing ever. It's just internally, I mean, it creates a temporary variable right here. It gets pushed to print, and then it prints it. So that's why this is still 5.7. We don't really need that anymore. Okay, so this is 5.7. It's a float. If we convert it to an int, all it does all it does is it cuts off everything after the decimal point, including the decimal point. So it didn't like round, right? If you want it to round, you can actually, there's a round method. What? Oh, well, let me just go over this real quick. So if you want to round stuff, yeah, actually, let's not go over rounding. I mean, you guys could like probably easily look that up. Let me show you guys something cool. So say that you actually want the ceiling of float. So say that float was actually not 5.7. It's actually 5. I'll just keep it as 5.7. So okay, so ceiling. So you know how I cast it to the integer, it cut off everything after it. But what if you actually wanted the 6, right? What if you wanted it to get the ceiling? In mathematical terms, it's a ceiling. What if you actually wanted it to get the ceiling? Python by default does not have a ceiling method in its default library. What you actually have to do is you have to import the library. So importing libraries is pretty easy. Unlike Java, you don't have to do it at the top. You can just sort of do it wherever you want. So you can just import it right here. You can do math, which is the library which you imported, .ceiling, and then I'll take the ceiling of this. That'll cast it up to a 6, and then you can print that. And then you can also do the same thing with floor. So in this case right here, that's the 6. And then in this case, this is the 5. All right, so that's math operations. Let's get into something. Let's actually increase the pace a bit. So let's do lists. Lists are super useful. All right, so interesting thing, Python does not have arrays. Isn't that crazy? Like you guys, like first time I heard that, I'm like, what? Is it broken? Is it not completed? Is this someone's pet project in a basement? Why does it not have an array? You know? But now that I'm thinking about it, when I first started off coding, you know, I learned arrays. I'm like, oh, these are really cool. And then I learned array lists. I'm just like, I'm just gonna use array lists for everything. Like it manages so much stuff for me, you know? And I use like some other stuff. I'm just like, I'm gonna use this stuff, you know? So essentially it replaced everything an array did with lists. So you don't really need arrays anymore. They act almost in the exact same way. So this is how you make a list. So you do lists, or you do some list, or you just do any variable name equals, and then to say that something is a list, use the square brackets. So this is an empty list. And again, you can just put some list here and it'll print that empty list. You can do type and it'll tell you that is indeed a list. And let's put something in there. So what you do is you'd put like 1, 2, 3. So those are all numbers. So this in your head or thinking in other languages, this would be like an integer array, right? 1, 2, 3, right? But what's interesting is it's actually not an integer array because there are no arrays. In Python, there's also no ints. Well, not explicitly at least. You could actually put something in here, something. And then if we print this list, it won't complain. Like if you did this in both C, C++, and Java, it's going to complain like, hey, don't mix these two together, separate but equal, yo. And then so, but since you're using lists in Python, it's not going to complain. It treats everything essentially just as something without a type. So it's not going to complain that you're storing a string with an integer. So other stuff you can do with lists, obviously you want to index something. So if you get something at element 0, it's going to print you the 1, you know, basic stuff. Here's something else which is really cool, which other languages don't have. Well, some languages have. But you can actually do, I think they're called comprehensions, so that you can say, actually I had a good example of this. So if you do for 1 to, so say that you want to get everything after the 3, right? In something like, if you don't remember how to do it in Java, sublist or aslist or I don't know. In Python, it's just much more easier. You don't have to look at the API and you don't have to scratch your head how to do it. What you do is you just do :3. So what this does is it takes everything before the 3. So the colon is like a before, or I mean the colon's like a separator. And then if you put the colon on the other side of the 3, it's going to take everything after the 3, right? So you're using the 3 as like sort of like a divider, right? You take everything before the 3 and everything after the 3. And then you could also do, sorry, I'm kind of rushing here because oh, that was an hour. Did not feel like an hour. You can also do every element between 4 and 5, or 1 and 4. So that is your list. That's done. All right. Kevin, are we out of time? Don't we have an extra 30 minutes? We have the room. We have the room for another 30 minutes.
Sure.
All right. So since that clearly took longer than I thought, I'll just rant, and you guys absorb, and then we'll save questions till the end. So essentially, like everything your professor has done to you your whole life. And then you could ask questions at the end. This stuff's, I mean, Python's designed to sort of be simple, so it shouldn't you shouldn't scratch your head too much. So what this is how, so you guys got the gist of lists. So this is a list of strings. You have Sansa, Arya, and Bran, and then you have another list of strings. And if you want to combine those two lists, you use the extend method, and then if you run that right now, the first one would be the combination. The first one would be the combination of both families. It didn't affect, so that only affected the Stark family. It didn't affect the Lannister family, because what you're doing is you're expanding the Stark family. You're adding all the Lannisters to the Stark family. The Lannister family stays the same. However, yeah, that's pretty much it for extend. It's not too much there. If anyone wants to know what sets are, so I'll go over sets. All right, sets are really cool. Why? Well, because say that you have two lists of integers, right? 1, 2, 3, and then 3, 4, 5, right? Say that you want to print all its, let me just add some comments right here. All right, say that you want to find all, so this is all the differences, right? The differences between 1, 2, 3 and 3, 4, 5 is the 3, right? So if you run this, it gives you the 3. I mean, this is pretty simple to read and understand, right? You're going through A, and then you're checking if A is in this list, right? Make sense? And then you're printing it, and then if you want what's not in the list, you do this. 1 and 3 are not in, or list A or list B does not have 1 and 2, which list A has. And then if you just flip the variables, it's going to be the same thing. So in this case, you're using a for, an if, I mean, you're using a bunch of things. This is classically how you do stuff or do this type of operation in most languages. In Python, it's a little easier. I mean, you could theoretically do this in Java as well. But you use a special type called a set. Oh no, I deleted the list. That's not good. All right, so what you do is you first cast these lists to a set. You save them as a set. And then if you take set A union set B, you get the union of that. So the first one is the union. I mean, you guys all should know what union is. And then the second one is the intersection. So if you do the intersection of A and B, you get the intersection of A and B, which is 3. Then you do difference, you get 1 and 2. And then if you do the difference of B and A, so what's different from B, or what's in B, which A does not have, it's 4 and 3, right? Pretty straightforward. I could email, I mean, I could post this later so you guys could like look at it in depth, but this is just a rant. Should have went over this earlier. So this is ranges. So like your regular for, okay, loops. Wow, we just got the loops. Great. So, so instead of doing, so in most languages like C and Java and, right, you do for int I. Again, you don't need int. You're pretty clear as to what something is. You set it to 0, and then you're going to I less, or you're going to I less than something. And I mean, I guarantee you, not to be like cocky here, but I guarantee you all of you have messed up with this little, you know, this little operation here. Is it less than? Is it greater than? Is it equal to? And something which helps with that in your languages of C and Java is using an enhanced for loop. But sometimes you want the index, right? So the way Python deals with this is, so this is the variable. So like this is your I, right? And then you're going from a range you're starting from 10. So by default, it starts from 0 to 10. So it prints 0 to 10. If you want to specify this, so say that you want to print something from 5 to 10. I should comment everything out. Comment faster. All right, 5 to 10. There's 5 to 10. Pretty straightforward. You could read that. You don't really even need any like former knowledge in understanding that piece of code right there. However, range only works going up. So from 5 to like 15 and onwards, you can't do 5. You can't do 10 to 5. So let's try to do 10 to 5 and see what happens. So nothing happens, but what? Anyways, so nothing happens. Why? Well, because range by default added stuff. So it took 10 and then added something to it, and it expected it to get closer to 5, and it didn't get closer to 5, and it's just like, yo, what's going on? So what you have to do is you actually have to specify. So by default, essentially what this looks like internally is it's like 0 to 10, and then you're adding 1 each time. But the 1 is like under the covers. It does that for you. However, if you're not adding 1, if you're subtracting 1, like in the case from going down, you have to specify it. So what you do is from 10 to 0, you do -1 right there. And then if I run that, it goes from 10 to 1 downwards. And another cool thing is that you can change this to a 2, and it'll go. Actually, let's do that right now real quick. So it'll go. So it starts at 10, subtract 2, 8, subtract 2, 6, 4, 2, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great way of getting even numbers without having to use modulus, which you'd usually use in your respective languages. So in this case, you have the even numbers, right? Because you start from 0, add 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, right? And then here you're starting from 1, you add 2, 3, 5, 7, 9. So that's how you do. That's usually how you do ranges. And of course, well, that's how you go from. You could actually change this. So something I should have went over, which was pretty important, is how do you get the length of a list? So say that we have a list. 1, 2, 3. Let's say that we don't want to. I'm not going to go through enhanced. I'll go through enhanced for loops a little later. So say that we want to know how big it is, and then we want to print all of its elements. So we want to do. This should look pretty familiar. And then we're going to go every one. Well, that's actually implicit, like I stated earlier. But how big is list, right? How do you do how big it is? Usually you do like size or stuff like that. But in this case, you just do, there's a library method called len. You throw list in there. You could throw a bunch of stuff in there. You could throw a string in there. It'll work. I mean, because like, I never really got why you have length in one data type and then you have size in another. Like, why don't you just call it the same thing? Because you're constantly confusing it unless you have like superb memory or something. So in this case, we printed everything in list. So that's how you go from this is the last, well, this is how long list is. And I mean, that's pretty straightforward. That's essentially just like size or length in your respective languages. Appending stuff is not too hard either. What you do, so if you have an empty list.
Did you make a list out of a range?
Yep, I'm going to go over that right now, right here. So, ignore everything in the comments. All right, so here you have an empty list. I showed you guys what this does. This goes from 0 to 10. So I is going to go from 0 to 10, and then each time you're taking 0, you're adding it to the list. You're taking 1, you're adding it to the list. You're taking 2, et cetera, to 10. And then you're printing the list. So if we run this, 0 to 9, right? It obviously doesn't count, like it's exclusive, so it doesn't count to 10. So you use append to add something to a list. If you want to, okay, and then so for ranges, so this is really cool. So instead of doing all of that, Python tries to make it even easier for you. I mean, because that didn't take a lot of time, but Python actually does this cool thing, which is actually pretty useful for two-dimensional arrays. So what it does is inside, when you're creating the list, you do the square brackets to say that it's a list, and then you say, okay, I'm going to put a for loop in here. So the for loop starts from I, or starts from 0 to 10, goes from 0 to 10, it uses I, and then, so essentially it just did, I deleted it, but it does all of this in this one line right here, and then it just does that for you. And that's really convenient, especially when you're not using statically defined like numbers. You're just using like variables and stuff. It's just a slightly more convenient way of doing stuff, but it's just a little different. It's just something Python has, which C and other languages don't. Dictionaries. So you guys are probably not familiar with the word dictionary. I mean, besides like, opening a dictionary, looking for the word, stupid and seeing your friend's face there or something. But dictionary is actually what Python calls a hash table. They're virtually synonymous. There might be some differences, but essentially when you hear dictionary in Python, essentially just think of a hash table. So to define a hash table, it's actually way easy. It's actually easier, in my opinion, than how you would in Java. Because when you start learning it in Java, you're like, okay, I have to import this library. I have to go research these methods. What does this method even do? But here, it's just like something like really close to home. It's just like something really easy to use. So the way you define it, so making an empty hash, you just do this curly braces. You do the curly braces, and then since it's a hash, you can put anything in the element here, and then you could save anything here. So you could put like numbers in here. I'm just going to skim over this. And then similarly, you can put like, so if I print dict1, that's going to print value. These don't work. All right, so I printed dict. It's going to print me my entire dictionary. My entire dictionary at this point is just string correlating to value. That's what it printed. And then I saved a 1 in there. And then when I called that 1, I mean key, value, just, basic stuff. And then, I shouldn't delete that. To call all the items, you just call items. Actually, that might work. Let me try that real quick. Yeah, that does work. Similarly, you could iterate over them. And keys and values, I mean, similarly like Java, except it's like key set, right? So you can go for, I'm going to show you guys enhanced for loops real quick. Should have gone over that earlier too. So you do for item in dict. No, that's not what I was going to do. Wait, actually, let's try this. So it printed the 1 in the string, right? And if you want to go through all the keys like you would in Java, you just go through all the keys. And so that's only going to print you the keys, which is 1 in string. If you want to print all the values, you do values. That's going to print you the value and the value, right? Because that's what we saved both times, the value and the value, right? So that's keys, values. That's review, sort of. Just a different format. It shouldn't be too different. But this is essentially how you do enhanced for loops. Is you use the in instead of like the colon. It's not really all that different. All right, moving forward. Does anyone want to learn about command line arguments? It's kind of, I mean, you don't always. Nobody. Okay, we can skip that. We can skip that. Oh, here's a small thing about Python, which is a slightly different from other languages. So languages like C and Java. In Java, it's actually pretty simple. If you want to print a new line, you just do print line, right? And if you don't want to print a new line at the end of it, you just take out the ln. In Python, it's a little different. Doesn't mean it's worse. What you do is you add another parameter to. So here we're printing some stuff and then you're adding a comma, which is another argument, and then you're saying, I want this, when you print this, I want it to end with, let me just copy that for a second. I want it to end with what? Let me comment that out too. All right, so if I run this, actually I should not comment that out. All right, so if I run this, what does it do? It prints everything on one line. Why? Well, because at the end, by default, the print statement adds a new line after it's done printing, or after it's done printing the string. So after it's done printing this, it adds a new line. But but what you're doing is you're saying, hey, no, before you do that, or I mean, sorry, before you do that, just don't add anything to it. Just nothing. You know, just an empty string. And then you could, you could actually put whatever you want here. So that'll put what, right? And if you want, you can actually put the new line in manually. So you can put what in here.
How do you do it in the other version?
The one which,
This is 3, right?
yeah, this is 3. I don't have that version set up right now. I think you'd have to use circle braces. I'm not too sure. I think you're gonna have to look that one up. All right, console input, that's usually important for almost like nearly everything. So that's actually really easy, like way easier. Now this is actually like light years easier than Java, in my opinion. You can do it 2 ways. First way you can do it, ignore everything which is commented. First way you can do it is you print, enter a file name. It goes to the next line. Then you can put something in here like hello everybody, and then it prints back what you inputted. Like that's it. No scanner, no has next, none of all that confusion. It's probably even harder in C. I haven't done it in C in a while. Similarly, you can rewrite this and you could put it all on one line. Sorry, I'll leave that for reference. So you can just say, I'm creating a variable. I'm going to use this method. This method essentially does sort of scanner, like, you know, behind the scenes. It's going to print this, and then it's going to, you know, ask the person for input, and then whatever input they give you, save it in this variable. It's always taken as a string, and then you print that. Pretty straightforward. All right. I neglected to mention this earlier, but now you guys get to know. What is the difference between what is the difference between is and equal to? So how about we try and find out. Experimentation. So if we run x is 2, y is 2, and we run both of these comparisons, they return a Boolean. Internally, it's a Boolean. Both of these are true. That's pretty obvious looking at it. So you'd say, or one would say, there's no difference. However, what Python does, now this might be a little internally, what it does is it sees that x and y are both 2. And what it does is it says, well, why make 2 memory locations and both have 2 in them? Why not just have one memory location which has 2 in it, and then just 2 things pointing to it? Something like this. This isn't valid syntax. This is just sort of what, like, in your, like, how to explain it, like pseudocode. So x and y both point to 2. So this is stored in one memory location. So why did I mention that? Well, because is actually checks the memory location, and the equal to operator checks the value, and then we could actually discover that. So if we do, so you guys saw this, you enter some text. All right, so we'll enter some text. So stuff. All right, so we entered stuff. We entered stuff here. Stuff is saved here. It just prints what the stuff is. This is hard-coded So here we're doing an equal to operator, and then here we're doing an is operator. And then look at this. One of them is true, one of them is false. What's going on there? So what's going on there is the equal, so it's saved in 2 different memory locations. The reason for that is because this was taken through command, this was taken through input, and then this was just hard coded in. So this variable was made in a different memory location than this was, unlike the X and Y we saw earlier. So when you're doing the equal to, that actually checks the value. That goes inside this method, and it sees that it's stuff, and then it goes into this method, it sees that it's stuff, and it's just like, okay, stuff, the string stuff is equal to stuff. Similarly, in Java, it looked like equals. Oh, it looked like this, right? Now, what does the is do? The is actually goes to the memory location and checks if the memory locations are the same, and they're not, and that's why it's false. Now for the good stuff, defining a method. Defining a method's pretty simple. You just do def method. More time. Yeah, this is just the. And then you could just call the method. And then if you run this, it prints the stuff. Like, how easy was that? You don't need a return type because you could just return anything, you know, whatever it gets, you can just parse. You could also put parameters in here if you wanted to. So you can put like stuff. Then you could put X here. You could put, oops, yeah, like that. Pretty simple, like pretty straightforward. That's how you make a method. I think we're out of time. Is that right, Kevin? All right. Thank you guys for coming. I could answer questions.
We'll have a second workshop, part 2, that will go in more detail.
Yeah, there's enough demand. When is that?
And yeah, it's to be determined, but I'll announce it on the Facebook group.
Is this link going to be posted there as well?
So, the YouTube link?
Yeah, where I don't know where it is.
Do you want to upload the files?
What files? Oh yeah. I'll post this file on the Facebook event.
So what other workshops are there? So the other workshops that we will be having currently that are planned are the Swift workshops, the Git workshop, and well, we're going to. So everyone, this will conclude our Python workshop, but we will have a part 2 that will be planned after our other workshops, like such as our Swift workshop and our Git workshop. They will be coming up in the following weeks. Afterwards, we'll have our Python part 2. And if you guys are interested, you can look on the Facebook group, and we'll announce it when it comes around.
The same group on which the event one was.
Yes, we'll make a new event, and we'll announce it, and we'll tell everyone in person as well as
No problem.
Igor,
Yep.
do you have any references that you recommend?
Oh yeah. So references. You can use Python the hard way. But is it like killing you guys? I hate like Python the hard way. This is a great reference. Code Academy is also an okay reference. It kind of goes slow, but this tool is pretty great. Yeah. Have you heard about this resource before? I'd check it out.
It seems kind of counterintuitive to hardware.
Yeah. Well, it's, I don't know, it's just called that, but
So is this good for people who already know how to program, like the basics, right?
yeah, pretty much.
It isn't like teaching from like scratch.
What I recommend everybody to do, since I explained pretty much like the basics of like, you know, methods, for loops, lists, hash, is take some simple, try to do like the first like 10 problems of Project Euler, or just do fun problems, just think of problems, try to port over your other programs. So if you wrote something in C or Java, try to convert that to Python, you know, most of the stuff, like, I don't know what wasn't covered, but whatever wasn't covered, I mean, a lot wasn't covered, but what wasn't covered, you guys could just Google and then try to figure it out. But overall, the basics, you guys should try to one-to-one copy and port over your code. That's a really great way of learning. That's sort of what I did. I sort of didn't really use a manual. I just sort of like, you know, survival kit, you know, a knife in a forest and a hunt on my own. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that.
Can we get a video of that?
It's recorded on YouTube,
Are
yo.
you sure?
Yes. You can double check.